Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is the Stephen Allen. We are back with another 007 movie review. Now today we'll be reviewing the first James Bond film of the 90s and the first debut of Pierce Brosnan. We'll be reviewing 1995's GoldenEye. Now before we get into the review and the cast, let's get into a bit of background. Now, by this point, we were into the 90s. And by this point, the Cold War had finally ended. And sadly, due to a very long dispute over film rights, it had been by this point 6 years before, James Bond, we've seen a James Bond film. And sadly, Timothy Dalton, who only did 2 films, dropped out. Now, I'm one of those who really thought Timothy Dalton should have had a chance to at least do 1 more film. But he probably just got sick and tired of waiting, and honestly, not much people really accepted him. We were really excited when in 1994 it was revealed that Pierce Brosnan was cast to be Bond. Now, for many fans, at the time, he was considered the next logical choice, and him being in the role was well overdue. Also, by this point, with the Cold War over, many people were criticizing of Bond even existing, as many people always felt that Bond was a relic of the Cold War and really shouldn't be in anything past that. I always found that weird, as I never really got that Bond was a relic of the Cold War. We really didn't get much of that, but hey, I guess there is a reason to. So this film not only had to prove that Bond was still relevant post the Cold War, but also to adapt itself. This was the 90s, times were changing, and with that, they made the film GoldenEye. Now, GoldenEye is actually a reference, because just like the previous one, License to Kill, the title from these things weren't taken from short stories or actual novels created by Ian Fleming. But GoldenEye is actually the estate that Ian Fleming used to live in, where he written the James Bond books. And then the name of that estate was GoldenEye. So already we are really excited. This is a brand new film. So the question is, how's it hold up? Well, before we do that, let's get into the cast. Like I said, this is Pierce Brosnan's first time in the role of James Bond. Now, I will be honest, nothing against Pierce Brosnan. He does portray a lot of the cool factor and the charisma that we've missed from the Sean Connery era. And I also like how he's more of an action hero. But if I can be quite blunt, that does make him a little bit bland. He's essentially trying to encompass everything of all the previous Bonds that came before him, and as a result, he doesn't really bring anything new to the role. Nothing new. I gotta be quite frank here. Other than that, I found him to be but despite that, what he's playing here is pretty good. Isabella Scaruppo as Natalia Simonova. Essentially our main Bond girl, and she's a really fun and really great, interesting character to the film. Now, sorry if these names were pronounced wrong, but that's all I can pronounce. Basically, she's a Russian computer analyst, or a very low-level one, but she is a really fun and very interesting Bond girl. She's more independent. She's not the damsel in distress. She uses a lot of her wits, and other than that, she also is incredibly independent. Something I've always loved. Sean Bean in the role of Alec Trevelyan, 006, and is a very interesting and very unique character that we'll get to later in the film. Another villain we have here is Famke Janssen as Yzenia Onatop, essentially the female femme fatale, and arguably one of the best female henchmen that the series ever gave us. We also have Alan Cunham in the role of Boris, essentially another Russian computer analyst in league with the bad guys. A little bit spoiler there. Jeffrey John as General Oromov, essentially another renegade general, but this one is far more paranoid and far more unhinged than we ever got with any of the other renegade Russian generals we ever had. And here we have Joe Don Baker returning to the Bond series, but this time playing a completely different character, playing the character of Jack Wade, essentially a CIA ally. Now, the reason why we have him and not Felix Leiter is, again, after License to Kill with the leg, they decided not to bring that character back with the leg, and honestly, that's quite understandable. Rounding out the rest of the cast is Desmond Llewellyn, once again back as Q. Now, every one of the main MI6 cast got recasted, but they didn't recast him, and honestly, that is a good reason why. You just can't replace Desmond Llewellyn. He is, for many people, the Q, and I can't disagree. Miss Moneypenny is once again recasted, this time by Samantha Bond, and she takes over the role and does her more unique twist, more inclined with a little bit of a predecessor of the very first Moneypenny of the Eon films, a little bit of that, but also doing something completely different and more updated to keep up to date with the changing times. Speaking of characters that were updated, we have M, for the first time ever in the series, portrayed by a woman, and by the great Judi Dench, a phenomenal actress. She is truly great in everything she's in, and for her to be Bond's boss is, for me, a really great and fantastic casting choice. Here we also have Bill Tanner, who we've seen in very minor roles in two Bond films of the classic era, but this time they actually bring him to be more of the center front. Here, Bill Tanner is portrayed by Michael Kitchen. Hopefully that name's been pronounced right. And essentially is kind of like an old colleague and even friend to Bond. And he's definitely fun. He's fun, even though he does have quite the limited screen time that we're given. We have Robbie Coltrane in the role of Valentin Dmitry Sukovsky, essentially a former KGB agent turned Russian gangster, and he truly is another memorable character in this film. And of course, a very minor character is our Russian Defense Minister Cheky Karova. Hopefully that name's been pronounced right. Also, interesting fact, in this film there is a special cameo by a member of the Broccoli family, and the reason, and well, what I failed to mention is by this point in the series, first off, he would have many cameos, pretty much literally nearly throughout the series, but also by this point, Cubby Broccoli had passed away, and the truly last thing he had in control of the Bond series was casting Pierce Brosnan as Bond. With his untimely passing, he had handed the reins to his stepson, who gets the cameo, and of course his daughter, essentially helmed the reins to do the Bond series, and to this day they are still running the franchise. Anyway, with the cast out of the way, let's get into the plot. We begin the movie with the usual gun barrel, this time with Pierce Brosnan in the gun barrel, and also the music is drastically different too. We then open to essentially some mysterious man, who the camera does not show his face, running all over this dam and eventually doing this jump off it. And it's a truly fun and fantastical stunt that really pumps you for the adventure ahead. He eventually, and again the face is still hidden, and he starts almost cutting open this hatch and ends up essentially in the Russian toilets, where Pierce Brosnan makes his introduction with a witty funny line, his face revealed, and knocks the guy out. Then he does some spy work, going all over the place, and despite what people may not like about when your face is actually revealed, I always liked how he just looks Bond and the real professional here. Eventually he ends up in what I assume is some kind of cupboard, where he ends up meeting Alec Trevelyan, another MI6 agent, 006. And it's already established during the dialogue that these two are not just professional allies, but also kind of friends, and you can clearly judge by what they're doing that they've worked on previous missions before, which I've always loved, which I always like here. And essentially they are are infiltrating a Soviet chemical weapons facility, and it's a really fun moment when they get there and start planting bombs, only for the alarm to go off, resulting in the two having a gunfight. However, Bond is forced to surrender, and instead of putting the 6 bombs for 6 minutes, he ends up putting on for 3 minutes. And watches his best friend essentially get shot by General Umov. He quickly makes his escape, and he ends up on this aeroplane pad. That's all I can describe it as. And there's this cool scene how he's trying to really outrun the guys following him, and he also hops on a motorbike and jumps on this plane, and nearly crashes into the rocks below and flies away. And as he flies away, the whole factory explodes behind him. It's a really fun and interesting scene. Now, people can't get caught up on it, on like, well, if he started on a dam, he goes down. How does he end up here on this airplane pad, clearly up in the mountains? Again, you have to suspend your disbelief and clearly come to the conclusion, well, he must have gone up. And to be fair, we see he do go up a hatch, so it must have been a very long one. Overall, I do see why people can't get caught up on it, but it's really nice and really energy to the film, and really gets you invested that Bond is back. We then go to the usual title sequences with the song GoldenEye, this time sung by Tina Turner. And it's a really nice song. Also like the symbolic meanings of essentially the Cold War coming to a close. It feels like a little bit of the 90s version of Goldfinger. And it's a really nice, and I like the symbolic meaning that, the Cold War is over, and is coming to an end. And I love it. We then transition to Bond essentially driving around in the Aston Martin DB5, which we haven't seen technically from Thunderball. So that has made its return in literally nearly 2 decades. Also here, it's said it's 9 years later. It is so up to 1995, and it's essentially a different time period. And whilst he's driving this Aston Martin, he gets into a sort of car chase with Xenia Onatop. And it's a quirky, tongue-in-cheek, a little bit cheesy car chase, but I absolutely love it. And of course, while this is happening, Bond's getting evaluated. And he eventually pulls over the car, charms the woman sitting next to him, and it's a really funny moment. And it's really funny. He is in Monte Carlo, and he ends up going to a casino where he runs into Xenia Onatop again. Once again, Pierce Brosnan just looks the role. He may get criticized for not bringing anything new to the role, but honestly, by this point in the series, they just wanted a fun action Bond, and I get it. And honestly, I can't exactly say I'm disappointed. With that, we also get to see more of Xenia Onatop, who is revealed that he is working for the Janus crime syndicate, and we also see the main asset is she has the ability to essentially kill people by strangling them with her thighs, and we get to see that to an unlucky victim. She then, along with an accomplice, hijacks and steals the Tiger helicopter, which is a helicopter that is designed to not be destroyed by a electromagnetic pulse. Bond does his usual investigation work by jumping on a boat, finds the victim that Xenia has killed dead, and tries to prevent the helicopter from flying, but only to get captured. We then jump to in Senyanov, Siberia, a Russian satellite station, where we meet Natalia and Boris, 2 computer grammars, and essentially we get a little bit of Boris's characteristic. Like, to give passwords, he would give you like these clues, almost riddle type things. Essentially a bit of a showman and a very absolutely expert hacker. And we also see that Natalia is also one too. She takes no nonsense from Boris, almost on friendly terms. And what I like, and she then goes off for a coffee break just as Boris goes out for a smoke break. what ends up happening, and what ends up happening now is Onatop and General Urumov essentially end up breaking their way into the satellite station, stealing what is essentially the equipment to use for the GoldenEye satellite, which was revealed is a satellite that was meant to be used in the Cold War, but the Russians have forgotten about its existence. They end up taking control of the satellite and massacre everyone in the place. And here we also get to see a little bit more craziness of Xenia Onatop, as she's literally turned on by the sight of dead bodies, which shows just how psychotic she is. Natalia manages to survive the massacre, and Oromov and Xenia Onatop to cause an electromagnetic pulse that destroys the satellite. And Natalia is the lone survivor. I love her character here. She's the lone survivor of a brutal massacre. I can see how it shaped her. She's also a person that takes no nonsense, and she makes her escape. Eventually we go back to MI6, where in the real world they are actually at the real life MI6 headquarters, at least at the time. Again, the Cold War's over, so they don't need to be hiding at Universal Exports. Times have changed. And here Bond meets up with Moneypenny, and I love the bantering between the two. It shows how Moneypenny is clearly updated to the present times. And also here is uniquely different, as we also get M's introduction, and Judi Dench just steals that scene she's in. Bill Tanner is also nice to see him and actually have more of an impact on the story and in the role than I think other Tanners by this point in the series, none of them have actually ever done. It's then they get caught up and they find out what essentially happened in Siberia. It is the GoldenEye satellite, it exists, and Bond's essential mission is to find who's caused this and stop and take down the satellite. And the main suspect is General Ormov, even though Bond is told that despite what happens, don't let his personal feelings for the death of Alec Trevelyan, blind him. And I love how M points that out. Judi Dench, for me, absolutely owns the role of M. And for many, there's two actors who are considered the best people to have portrayed M. At least two. That is Bernard Lee, the original M, and many people consider the classic M. And then, of course, there's Judi Dench, who also does the role her own. She commands so much authority figure, the dialogue. Judi Dench was just perfect man for this role. And I love how she calls out Bond as being a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War. Again, I like how she can do that. And it makes sense for Bond, that is literally his characteristic, to have a woman as his boss. I thought that was terrific casting choice. Now we also get to see more of Natalia doing her own detective work, as she bluffs her way to using this computer to track down Boris, who was not dead in the massacre, only to find him and find out that he's in league with his Yanis syndicate. We also get to see Bond go back to Russia, where he meets with Wade. It's a nice, funny scene. I've got to admit, Baker here is far better in this role of Wade than he ever was of Brad Whitaker. And I felt he was just perfect made for this role. And he's saying Jimbo all the time. And how Bond is still not yet to let loose or let go of the old ways, such as those like when you speak in code and all that. He's clearly still adjusting past the Cold War. Also here we find out in order to find Yanis, the guy who runs the syndicate, you have to go to his competition. Valentin Sukovsky, who Bond reveals is an old KGB agent, and he and Bond had a run in the past. In fact, he is responsible for him having a limp, and it's clear that the two aren't on best of terms. However, Bond does go to Valentin, and there is the scene where he is pretty much held at gunpoint. For me, Robbie Coltrane, is, even though he'll be forever best remembered as playing Hagrid, he'll always be I always remember him for his first ever role I was experienced to, and that was GoldenEye, rather than Harry Potter, which is strange, because I saw Harry Potter first, but I guess because I didn't know that the two were the same. Who knows? Eventually, the two form an alliance, as Sukovsky realized he could gain a bit of profit from teaming up with Bond. He also reveals that, even though he's never met Yanis, he also reveals that Yanis is actually a Cossack, a rogue group of Russians that worked with the Nazis during the war, and then double-crossed the Nazis to go work with the British. But by the end of the war, the British betrayed them, sold them out, and essentially massacred nearly the whole lot. Men, women, children. And Bond even quotes, "not our finest hour." But Zukovsky says they were ruthless people and got exactly what they deserved. I can't exactly say that killing them, at least kids, would have been right, but I get the guys, or at least the higher powers that ran the Cossacks, yes, but women and children I always question, at least. Anyway, basically, Valentine helped set up a meeting with Yanis, and we get this really fun scene when they're in this almost spa, where Bond is having a fight with Valentine Zukovsky, and it's a really fun scene. You can really just see these two bringing their A game. Onatop is just completely mental here, and I love the performance. I absolutely do. Eventually, Bond forces her to take him to Janice, and we go to this almost graveyard, this caretaker place, where all these old broken monuments, and the Tiger helicopter, and all these monuments are relics of the Cold War, where Bond comes face to face with Yanis, and to his shock, this person is Alec Trevelyan, though scarred. I love the concept of the main villain being a rogue 007 agent. Now, when I first saw this, I was shocked. I did not see this coming. Again, that's probably because I didn't see the promotional materials, and after seeing it, the promotional materials were promoting Bond adversary to be Alec Trevelyan. But I liked how I didn't know. It was a genuine shock. It is also revealed that Alec Trevelyan is actually a descendant from the Cossacks. However, his parents killed themselves, but when the British found Alec, they brought him and essentially trained him to be a 00 agent. And I also like how his backstory is tragic, and he says that Bond at least got the luxury of having his parents dying in a climbing accident. The first time in the series where they flat out at least spell hints to Bond's origin, something that they never did in the Craig era. But I also felt that Bond really doesn't need an origin. But then again, I do love that reference. And it's even revealed that Alec Trevelyan was even considering on Bond tagging along with this scheme, but he knew that Bond would never go for it. He then ends up knocking out Bond with a tranquilizer and throws him in the Tiger helicopter, set to fire rockets and explode, killing him and Natalia, who's also in the back, screaming her head off. Now screaming can become a little bit of damsel in distress, but the way that Natalia's doing it is not really. Not really. And I like how Bond almost hesitated to shoot Alec, probably because of how much of a, connection they had. Bond and Natalia managed to quickly make their escape, all great and with a great soundtrack, and are then captured by a bunch of Russians and are brought to the Russian minister. I like how Bond and him have this argument, only for Natalia to tell him to stop, to shut up, and reveals that it was General Romov, and reveals the second satellite, only for General Romov to come in, shoot the minister, and try to frame Bond for the assassination, only to end up with Bond and Natalia making their escape and rushing all over the place. I do like, however, in this scene before the minister came in, there was this nice scene where the two had a camaraderie, or tried to understand each other. And already, the scene where they're running all over the place, like essentially the archives, running all over shooting, it feels so action-packed, and for me the soundtrack just amps up the momentum. Eventually Bond does make his escape and jumps out the window. I love every moment of that. And he managed to make an escape by using a belt that he used to jump out a window. Now I have forgotten a scene where Bond visiting Q's lab. But I want to save that scene for some point in the review. But it does happen after Bond's given his mission, where he meets Q, gets his belt gadget, his pen gadget, and his car. And it's a really fun scene. Now, I kind of left it and kind of realizing now it happened way before, and what I should have done is probably stop and restarted the review, but honestly, I didn't want to. Anyway, but Bond does make his escape, and Natalia is taken prisoner by Oromov and is taken to a car to drive away, and Bond chases them, but not in his car, in a freaking tank. One of the best moments, and I like as soon as he's driving that, they blast the James Bond theme, and that feels so earned to have that theme be blasting in the background. And basically, Bond is trying to chase him, but cause destruction as he goes. It's really fun. It's a really fun scene. Eventually, Oromov goes to a train where he meets up with on the top, and they bring Natalia on board, where they meet Alec Trevelyan. Bond also makes his way there. The train then takes off, and Bond kind of follows-ish. I'm not really sure how to describe, but kind of follows. We then get a sort of scene where Alec tries to seduce her by using old tactics that I'm sure would have been in the other Bond films, at least of the previous decade, maybe making a little bit of a fun to Bond's reference, or Bond's past in past films. Bond eventually goes to a sort of tunnel where he has his tank, and essentially is threatening to fire it at the train, and Xenia Onatopp is immediately turned on by this, showing that she's completely mental. Eventually, he does fire and shoots the train. He eventually makes his way onto the train and holds Alec Trevelyan, Xenia Onatopp at gunpoint with a machine gun. Eventually, Oromov makes his way in, holding Natalia at gunpoint. Now, there's a little bit of kerfuffle here, and what I mean by that is Bond tries to get Oromov to back off by saying that Alec is a Cossack, try to use some deception trick. Eventually, Natalia and Alec try to make their escape, and Bond ends up gunning down General Oromov. Now, as they eventually are locked in the train with a countdown of 3 minutes to explode, Bond is trying to find his way out quick by using a laser watch. And I do like the scene how Natalia is getting on the computer and plans to trace him, finding out where that they could be going. Bond's impressed for a moment until she turns around and shouts, "Don't stand there, get us the hell out of here." And immediately he goes, "Yes, sir." I love that moment. I love how he can just switch to that and make that funny. A little bit of the Roger Moore humor, I gotta admit, is in Pierce Brosnan here. A little bit, but has a bit of that suave and coolness of the Connery films. Eventually, the two make their way out of the helicopter just as it explodes, and the two develop romantic chemistry and a bit of an attraction to each other. They eventually make their way to Cuba by driving Bond's new car, a BMW. And it's a really cool looking car, but the problem is, even though just in the Q scene, which I mentioned I kind of skipped, they built up of having all these gadgets, but they don't come into play. And the reason why I also skipped the Q scene with the workshop, even though it is fun to see old Desmond Llewellyn in the Q lab, I will admit, I have a feeling that the stuff within the Q lab isn't as fun as it used to be by this point, and I don't know why. Anyway, it's just worth pointing out. Eventually, they meet up with Wade, who takes the BMW, and they end up taking the plane and flying. We get some scenes where Natalia and Bond really develop chemistry towards each other, and how Bond has to come to terms with he may have to kill his best friend. I will admit, the emotional scenes, at least how it's written in this film, Pierce Brosnan does not execute it as well. He doesn't do it terribly, but for me, he doesn't do it as well. They eventually fly the plane over the area where it was tracked, where Alec Trevelyan would be, only to be shot down by essentially a rocket, and end up with Natalia essentially attacking the two. And she jumps down by helicopter. It's a really fun scene, and the energy that Natalia's Onatopp's actor brings to the role is absolutely fantastic. I felt that no one could have done this role better. Eventually, it does lead to her essentially being by Bond shooting the pilot of the helicopter, and because she's attached to a cord, she ends up, getting squeezed to death by a tree. And I find that is actually a good way for a character to go out. Eventually, Bond makes his way to Alec Trevelyan's hideout, where we reveal the satellite, and it's absolutely breathtaking, this place. And I really feel that the villain outside layer is unique and different. Inside, however, it feels rather generic. But then again, it was the 90s, so I can kind of give it, for not going too out there in villain layer wise. Eventually, Bond makes his way in there, but he does standard spy stealth to get in, and is essentially captured and taken to Trevelyan. Whilst that happens, Natalia essentially sneaks into the computer room. When Alex sees him there, he runs where the girl is and orders his men to find her. We get the scene where essentially we get some like mind games between the two. It's revealed that Trevelyan's whole plan is to steal all the essentially financial records, basically everything of money value from the British, and use the GoldenEye satellite to fire it, destroying London, essentially wiping out the trace of the robbery. Now, it should be noted here that people can get confused with the plot. He wants to destroy Britain, but what's the point with the robbery? Well, think about it. You destroy Britain and all its financial records, you're essentially destroying the economy from getting rebuilt. So essentially, Alec not only will get a huge payday, but he will wipe out Britain's pretty much London and Britain forever, essentially getting revenge on what they did to the Cossacks, which is essentially not a bad villain plot. And immediately after, I like how immediately after, Alex Trevelyan also takes a few jabs at Bond about all the martinis he drunk and all the men he's killed, essentially saying that he drinks to quench all the deaths that he's done, and also that all the women that have been killed by him over the years, including ones he failed to protect. I think that's a reference to Tracy, and I feel that is a really low blow to for the character. And just as soon as that happens, Natalia's been brought into the room, assuming been found, but she's been in the computer room and has managed to disable the satellite, and Boris is having a hard time essentially trying to deactivate it. And essentially they are saved at the last minute when Boris accidentally is using Bond's pen, and he does this little quirk of, clicking 3 times to turn on and off the bomb. Eventually, Bond makes his move, throws the pen over to near some oil explosives, and essentially causes a complete explosion throughout the facility. Eventually, Natalia makes her way to a nearby helicopter, and Bond faces off with Alex Trevelyan throughout the complex, originally shooting, but then of course having a full-on fist brawl, which I absolutely love. People don't honestly talk about this villain fight, which I think they do, and I think it surpassed Red Grant's. Eventually, they make their way to this, the smallest point of the satellite dish. Anyway, they get to the bottom of this, essentially satellite dish, where Bond, at the last minute, gets the upper hand and pushes Alex Trevelyan off. And just as he's about to fall to his death, he quickly grabs him by the foot, essentially savoring the last minute before dropping him. And I absolutely love it, and Pierce Brosnan's line. And Alec falls to his death. Bond quickly makes his jump onto the helicopter and fly away, just as the satellite falls on top of Alex Trevelyan. And if the fall didn't kill him, the satellite crushed him to death. No way he could survive that. And just when it looks like Boris survives, he actually gets frozen by this carbohydrate behind him. And I absolutely love it. It cracks me up. Eventually, Natalia and Bond land in this field where they find out they are surrounded by Jack Wade and his Marines. You question why they couldn't have come in and help, but Sarah. I eventually end, well, not with Bond, usually the make-out scene which usually happens, but actually by flying away on a helicopter to parts unknown. It's a really great end, and honestly a really good start to Pierce Brosnan's tenure. GoldenEye is considered one of the best films of the Bond series, often in the top 10. Honestly, I have to agree. For me, this film just brought Bond back after its 6-year absence, and honestly, it's really great. I love the Cold War setting, the unique soundtrack, a very memorable and different villain than we are used to, a very great casted Bond girl, and honestly, with so many new additions added to the series, first off, a female M with a very phenomenal and well-casted actress, to Pierce Brosnan as Bond. Honestly, he does this role so well. Martin Campbell, who directed this, did an absolute great job of bringing Bond back, updating him to the modern at least to the 90s, and honestly, it's just great all around. It was a huge hit and was arguably one of the biggest Bond films of the 90s, and it's arguably considered, even to be the best Bond film of the 90s. Not many was released in the 90s, only 3. And this began Pierce Brosnan's tenure, and to many people, Pierce Brosnan was Bond. Though he is criticized for playing him two-dimensional and almost a carbon copy, essentially copying what the others have done before him, and then bringing nothing different to the character, portraying too much of either a comic book hero or an action hero. But honestly, that wasn't the point. The idea was to bring Bond back. And I think that, and honestly, Pierce Brosnan does show some really great moments here. And honestly, throughout the rest of his tenure, he does show some really great acting range, even though his films may not be as good. So anyway, that's GoldenEye, and for me, it's an absolutely great film. It's action-packed, it's maybe flawed in some place, and sometimes the logic doesn't do well, and I am disappointed we didn't get a Bond gadget car action scene, but overall, it's a pretty good film, and I can see why it's in many people's top 10. And there we have it, GoldenEye, a pretty good and solid Bond film. After the success of this, and Martin Campbell deciding not to come back, and they decided to keep the momentum going by releasing another Bond film in 1997, and that was Tomorrow Never Dies. So stick around when we review that one. And until then, this has been the Steven Hour, and so long for now.